Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today is the launch of Gems of War onto the Nintendo Switch. So I'll be covering a video I've been meaning to do for quite a while now, and that is going over the full progression system of early game into mid game from when you first start out a account in Gems of War. This video will not be going over specifically how to play the game, more so just how to progress through the game and how to use your resources, money if you so choose so, and time on the game as efficiently as possible when you're first starting out, just to not waste any of them. So, this video will be slightly more geared towards the Nintendo Switch version. However, it is applicable to any version of the game if you're starting a brand new account. So, let's get into things. First things first, when you first start out, of course, you'll be level 1 in Broken Spire doing some tutorial-like stuff. First thing to do, as soon as you get out of the tutorial menus and it lets you move around and navigate, is go into your settings menu. And there are a few things you're going to want to change. First is, by default, the show spell and mana details will not be checked. Make sure it is checked. This is important as you will not be able to see the enemies or your own mana accumulation. So normally you would notice that there's no number over top of the manas within a battle. But if you simply click this, it'll show 7 out of 7 or however much mana they currently have. Basically a number out of however much mana they have. So you'll be able to do this to know how much mana you'll end up needing for every single one of your own troops, as well as the enemy. I'm not sure why this isn't on by default. It's mainly, I guess, not to confuse newer players, but it's probably even more confusing with it off. But yes, make sure to go turn that on as immediately as helpful as it helps. The other thing that is pretty noteworthy is to change the animation speed. By default, I believe it is at 1 times, but you want to put it at pretty much anything higher than 1 times. Specifically how high depends on your preference, but definitely anything higher than 1, probably 1.5 times is good to start, then shift over to 2, then 3, and then 4 times once you finally have a better understanding of the game. It is advised to get to 4 times speed, or used to 4 times speed, as quickly as possible if you can, simply because most of the economy in Gems of War is based on the assumption that people are playing on the maximum speed of the game. So if you're playing on something like 1 times, not only will it seem a little bit towards the slower side, but you'll also technically be getting less resources per hour and less progress per hour. So just make sure to gradually increase this as you feel comfortable doing so, until you can eventually play the game at 4 times speed. It's normally not too bad, but when you first start out, you do want to put it a little bit lower than that, as it can be a little bit confusing what's going on the board if you do have it higher than that. Other than that, make sure to get into a guild as quickly as possible. By going into the guild menu, you'll be able to find plenty of guilds. You can also check on the gemsofwar.com official forum, as well as in global chat 1 underneath chat. All these locations should have ways to try to find yourself into a guild, but you definitely want to be in a guild. Guild has a lot of benefits, mainly being able to do tasks, which give all of your guild mates a bunch of resources, as well as being able to claim seals, which are used to open up keys, which allow you to gain various troops within the game. That's just one method of gaining keys. However, this is only applicable if you're actually in a guild. So even if you're not really planning on playing with guild people that much or really communicating with others, you do still kind of want to be chilling in a really casual guild at minimum, just so that you can accumulate some more of these resources. Though it is advised to actually play with a guild, as you can accumulate a lot of free resources without really having to go out of your way. Anyways, as far as the first day when you're first starting out, there might seem a little bit intimidating because there are so many resources as well as so many things to be doing. But one of the first things you should be doing is completing out a bunch of specific kingdoms in order to gain various benefits that they have, as well as all the dailies that are available. So first off, you'll be started with Broken Spire. You're going to want to complete out this kingdom's questline to completion. The main thing that this will end up giving you is Arena. Arena is a game mode that you'll be using quite a bit when you're first starting out, and it will be the main ways that you accumulate souls when you're starting out in the game. It's also a good way to just get oriented with some various low-level troops, and is a good way to start learning basically how to play the game as well. But the main purpose of this is to accumulate souls, and it will be your main soul accumulating method whenever you need souls throughout most of early game until you get proper soul farming methods. So complete out Broken Spire so you have access to Arena. After the completion of Broken Spire, the next kingdom that you actually want to do is one that kind of came in recently into being viable a couple weeks ago, and that is Pen's Vale, a kingdom in the past that was pretty irrelevant for the most part. But there is one really relevant factor, and that is once you complete out every single questline, they sometimes give you a hero class, as well as they always give you a kingdom epic. And this one is particularly noteworthy for its kingdom epic. Elwyn ended up getting a rather large buff recently, where he has a gigantic boost ratio. There's something kind of interesting about boost ratios in early game in that they are ridiculously overpowered. Most of the boost ratios in the game are balanced towards mid game for the most part. So anything that boost ratios off of a static amount, such as something on the board, which is what he does, tends to have ridiculously high damage in early game simply because it's not really skilled to be used in early game. And this troop has a 100% chance of being obtained from completing out the Pansvale Kingdom, making it one of the easiest to obtain, cheapest, quickest damage sources that you can currently get consistently 100% of the time when starting a brand new account. So great to go and get this as quickly as possible. Essentially, he does a bunch of damage randomly split amongst the enemies. So however much damage he has, let's say it's like 60 or 30 total, he'll end up doing like, let's say 7 to 1 and 6 to 1 and then 8 to 1 and then whatever is left to the other and something like that. It just splits it amongst the enemies, and if there's only one left, he would do all that damage concentrated on that one troop remaining. So yes, pretty decent damage overall. He ends up getting an additional 7 per yellow that he ends up destroying, and this in early game is pretty good because normally you'll be able to hit about 3, 4, 5, let's just say 5 yellows, possibly even more. And those 5 yellows would be 35 damage, not even counting his base damage off the ability, which might not seem like much later in the game, but when you're first starting out, that is enough to kill quite a bit of stuff, as well as just being good damage output in general. It also has decent board control in that it has a row, column, destroy, and row and column destroy. And it says destroy, so you do actually accumulate the method for every single gem that it ends up destroying, as well as the fact that it does a plus shape that will allow you to cascade into other various gem drops. But yes, really great troop to go and obtain right off the bat. Other than that, next kingdom you would want to complete out, oddly enough, is Urskea. Urskea, you'll end up getting the Sentinel hero class from. This is going to be the first hero class that you're going to be setting for a little while, and then you're going to be trying to get 250 wins on it. One of the main benefits that this ends up bringing to you is the fact of the weapon that it ends up giving. It is a really good weapon that upscales into most of the content that tends to have higher stats, which are a lot of the events that you might throw gems on, as well as delves in particular. But every single hero class that you end up obtaining ends up getting a specific weapon at 250 wins. This one is relatively noteworthy as it boosts ratios off of all the attack on the opposing team, and as enemies have higher attack, they will end up having higher, or as they have higher stats, they'll end up having naturally higher attack. So this basically just gives a bunch of armor to a specific ally, and then gives them enrage and barrier. The most noteworthy thing with this is you can use the Century Sentinel from the Hall of Guardians down in the Underworld, which you'll be able to obtain by about day 2 or so, or even day 1, which will allow you to basically give you attack based on all of the armor that you currently have. So you'll be able to use this to accumulate a really, really large amount of armor, and you'll be able to obtain this before things like Mang. One thing to note, in regard to Mang and other various hero weapons, every single time that you end up gaining a level, you will be able to put your masteries into various, or there will be 6 colors that you'll be able to put your masteries into, of a choice of 2. You're going to want to initially put these mainly into brown and then slightly into red. Main reason being is a lot of the better weapons in the game are focused on brown, so you want to get your Mana Surge chance up. Mana Surge is a % chance that you have whenever you end up taking a gem of a 3 match that you'll end up surging on it. And these numbers are relatively low early on, but they benefit a lot from having higher mastery. So you'll want to put these mainly into brown initially, as a lot of your core weapons that you're going to be using on hero, which for the longest time will be your strongest thing to use, will benefit a lot from having that higher brown. There's also several weapons that are really noteworthy, the main 3 being Bronze Lock Pistol, Mang, and Mountain Crusher, all of which are obtained from having a brown mastery, particularly Mang off of brown and red mastery. So you do want to be getting those as quickly as possible just to end up having a good arsenal of weapons. So after those things, and after Urskea, you're going to want to go and start unlocking some of the ones related to dailies. In regard to that, Blighted Lands is one of the first ones you're going to want to do. Blighted Lands ends up unlocking the Soul Forge. Soul Forge allows you to craft a lot of various stuff. The most noteworthy thing about this is it starts off at level 1. Never spend gems on Soul Forge. It is pointless as far as on this leveling system. You want to let it level up naturally just by getting kills, and then click the button that lets you upgrade it for free. You should never spend any gems at all to get this level up. So make sure never, ever, ever, ever to do that. One other noteworthy thing to mention while in this menu, as you are progressing through it, also never, ever, ever spend your diamonds on souls. This is completely pointless. I think they mainly just have it here to try to sink diamonds, but yeah, never accidentally click that. as you're going to mainly want to use your diamonds and a resource you accumulated mainly to craft mythics in the long run in order to start obtaining some of the hardest to obtain troops within the game. Speaking about diamonds and everything, after you complete out Bladed Lands, you're going to want to move on to Drifting Sands. Drifting Sands unlocks dungeons. Dungeons are used to accumulate most of the resources that you need within Soulforge. This game mode will be updated into the future, but as it currently stands, it's a relatively easy game mode that just gives you 3 battles. In early game, they can be a little bit harder, but we'll be going over some teams in a moment for early game related stuff. But basically, you do these 3 battles every single day, and you'll accumulate a bunch of diamonds, shards, and other various resources, all of which are used in the Soulforge to craft various stuff. You want to do these absolutely every single day if you have the time, and they normally don't take that long. In early game, it might take closer to about 10-15 minutes. However, once you finally get some solid teams, you can easily do it in under 5 minutes to complete out all 3 of these. But you definitely want to do that on a daily basis if you have the time, as diamonds will be basically the way that you get all of the harder to obtain and the specific troops that you want to lock down. Other than that, the only other kingdom related to dailies that you're going to want to make sure that you'll end up unlocking in a pretty timely manner is Cinna Mirage. This was the thing I was referring to in regard to the Underworld. If you end up clicking this thing right in the middle here, you'll end up unlocking the Underworld. The main noteworthy thing about Underworld is all of these factions down here have various troops that are really easy to obtain, that are going to be quite noteworthy to have just laying around, so that you can end up getting a good cheap arsenal of guaranteed troops. The most noteworthy things to really mention here is in the regard to Warrens, you're going to want to keep this at level 20. Basically keep doing the delve at level 20 over and over again. Out of every single delve currently in the game, it has the highest value, and you normally want to keep this at a really low level for multiple reasons. One is in early game, you're not really going to have that many things that could properly do delves. This delve is rather mid to late game content for the most part. However, if you just keep camping level 20, you can still accumulate quite a bit of shards. These chaos shards are used to open up various portals. They'll end up giving you various troops. Some noteworthy things that are around there are Gargoyle and the Sentinel from Hall of Guardians, the Asp from Fang Moor, and that's pretty much it for the most part, actually. Mainly those 2. However, you do want to accumulate troops within all these other kingdoms to work towards kingdom stars in the eventual future. But anyways, that's most of the stuff you'll want to get done right off the bat as far as the first few days. So as you're progressing through to the first week, you do want to start getting some of the other hero classes and start using those. For example, Stormheim to get Titan, as well as Zacian, in order to get Thief. So for these are insanely good hero classes, among 2 of the absolute best in the game. You mainly want to start with Urskea Sentinel just in order to gain the weapon that it has. However, as far as actual good hero classes, you're mainly going to be wanting using Stormheim's Titan or Zacian's Thief, most likely the Titan version, as it's more versatile and can be used for pretty much anything in any context of any team. Most of the other kingdoms, for the most part, can be ignored. There are a few good ones here or there, but those are the main ones you do want to get done initially. You can do all of them, but those are just the main ones, all the ones that were just mentioned. Other than that, as you are going and getting through the game, you're going to want to get every single kingdom and start upgrading these things. There are many ways that they can be upgraded. The main initial one that you're going to want to start doing is gold and starting to get these up. They all have a level system, which ends up giving masteries, tributes every hour, and possibly eventual extra stats. When you're first starting out, you're going to want to get every single kingdom to level 3 or to level 4. You don't want to get them much further than that initially. Just keep them all even and just get that small amount just to give yourself a nice big boost in masteries. If you're looking for gold, the way to accumulate gold is always PvP. PvP has the highest rate for gold in the entire game and is the main location where you're pretty much going to be accumulating a good majority of your gold. Anywhere from about 80 to 90% will be obtained specifically from PvP. Another noteworthy thing to mention about PvP is there are a lot of weekly tasks that are within the game. As far as dailies, there are things like the 3 delve battles that you can do within the Underworld. There are the dungeons that you can do every single day within your dungeon page over here to go accumulate resources. And there's various guild-related tasks on a daily and weekly basis, as well as just daily tasks. But as far as weekly stuff, the main ones that you really want to pin down every single week consist mainly of PvP. There is a page over here where you work towards 1,900 rating, and these rewards are pretty decent. You end up getting 46 glory keys among a decent amount of glory, as well as some ingots to upgrade weapons and some souls. So overall, really good to go and get this every single week. Doesn't really take that long to do at all. normally just a few hours or so, and even quicker once you get later into the game. So highly advised to do this. Good way to just get a good basis for keys every single week, as well as just accumulating your resources. And as I mentioned, you're already going to be gaining a lot of gold passively simply from doing PvP itself in ranked PvP. But other things to really noteworthy on a weekly basis are event objectives. Event objectives are found over here underneath the events page. Whatever it basically says to do here on any given week, you generally do want to do. It tends to have really high resources. While whatever the objective here can sometimes be time consuming, it normally is around 1 to 5 hours, so whatever it is, and it can give quite a bit of resources. As you can see right here, you can get 90 gems, 3 gem keys, and 12 event keys, all simply from doing this right off the bat. So really, really good in that regard. Other than that, as far as weeklies, as I mentioned, there are guild-related tasks. In this particular week, it is Tower of Doom. Basically, these are guild-related events that you can do with your guild in order to accumulate a bunch of various rewards through various tiers. You can spend gems on it, however, you can get quite a bit of free resources simply by not spending any gems. And there's also leaderboards and stuff associated with it on a weekly basis. But other than that, moving on to some things as you're starting to get onto more of a monthly scale, you do want to, within your first month, ideally have every single kingdom leveled to level 10. As I mentioned, you do want to get to level 3 or 4 initially, but after you get everything to level 3 and 4 and unlock all the kingdoms, you're going to want to focus on level 10ing them all. And you're going to want to start with magic kingdoms, then attack, then HP, then armor, in that order. To check what stat a kingdom gives, you simply go to this page and you'll be able to see what stat they are. Most of them are pretty obvious. This one is magic, though the other ones are a little bit more obvious. Obviously, if we go over to Suncrest or something right here, that was obviously attack. If we go over to something like Broken Spire, this is obviously HP and stuff like that. But you're going to want to start with HP, then attack, you're going to want to start with magic, then attack, then HP, then armor, in that order as far as all the kingdoms. So the main reason why magic and attack is first is they are both the offensive ones, and magic just overall is the best stat in the game. It ends up making a lot of troops do stronger things with their ability, and is just overall going to give you the most amount of progress if you do them first, as is one of the rarest stats in the game. Other than that, as you're progressing into your first month, you're going to want to start and actually having a decent guild. You're going to make sure, if you're not already in a good guild, to leave the initial guild that you ended up joining and try and find a somewhat established guild by then in order to start progressing a little bit further. A guild is one of the biggest things that helps with progression, as there are a lot of free resources that are capable of being accumulated on a weekly basis that you're going to want to be able to have. And if you're in a guild that's kind of slacking or is pretty inactive or anything like that, while that is perfectly fine if you're not really playing that much, if you are playing a lot, it's going to hurt your amount of free resources that you'll be able to obtain per week, which allows you to actually be able to play free to play if you are choosing to do so. So really, really important. If you haven't by a few weeks or the first month, once you've kind of got your footing, once you got everything to level 10 and you actually have disposable gold and stuff, you're going to want to start and moving on to actually obtaining a better, more organized guild, either with friends or just one that's already established by then. But anyways, that's most of the stuff I wanted to mention with the initial progression. Again, just leave any questions below if you still have any. Next, I want to go over some teams that are going to be useful when first starting out. Many of these are super easy to obtain. However, some of them are just low rarity stuff that might take a little bit longer, but within the first week or month should be pretty obtainable. Keep in mind, these are not some of the best teams in the game. These are simply just some ridiculously cheap teams that are super ultra easy to obtain that you'll be able to use to just try to do most of the content within the game. So first, starting out, we have a team right here, Mountain Crusher, Elwyn, Rowan, and Snow Panther. This is just something cheap that you can run this particular week on the launch of Nintendo Switch. Though this is applicable to any of the other updates in the future. Basically, the only thing that you switch out is the Snow Panther for whatever the event trip is. So Snow Panther, main reason we have this in is, as I mentioned, there are various event objectives on a given week. I ended up showing this one. However, what I didn't show is this one right over here. Every single week, there is a troop that you can use either in PvP and or Explore that will end up giving you some kind of extra resource. In this case, it is extra 400 gold in PvP and Explore. This is quite useful, as particularly this week, since gold is one of the main resources you do want to accumulate when first starting out within the game. So this gold is quite a bit, 400 when first starting out. So you're going to want to run this pretty much every single battle you do. And whatever the event trip is, regardless of what the resource is, you're probably going to be wanting to run that on your first week that you're first starting out. Whatever resource gain that is going to end up helping you out quite a bit, even if it isn't It doesn't happen to be gold. So essentially what we're doing here is just using that into a really cheap team. Bound Crusher you accumulate very early just by putting all your level ups into brown. You could probably obtain that by about level 50 or 60 or so. Elwyn, I already mentioned, you could obtain for free from completing out Pen's Veil. Romaine isn't necessarily needed here. However, I did include it in this team just because it has a 100% chance to be able to be accumulated. This you accumulate by completing out the Forest of Thorns questline. And the most noteworthy thing with this, even though you'll probably have a low armor value when you're first starting out, it does have a 2x boost ratio per armor. So let's say you currently have 20 armor, that will be 40 damage plus however much it has onto its cast right there. So this could potentially hit around 50s in early game, which will put it very similar damage to what Elwyn can end up doing. Might be a little bit lower at first, but as you get level 10 on some of your armor kingdoms, it will start to be scaled up to about what you'll be doing with Elwyn, and could even be more damage than your Elwyn. And of course, the Snow Panther here is for no purpose other than giving us extra gold or whatever the reason. So you would just use whatever event troop is applicable when you're first starting out on your given week, and use that there to start gaining some gold. And this is something that can be somewhat okay to use for PvP and Explore for your very first week and before you get any actual good troops. The next one here is something that you can run for harder pieces of content. This is mainly related to things like guild wars, whenever you're fighting someone who's a lot higher level than you, pet battles, dungeon battles, and other similar things. Basically, we have Mang. This you accumulate at, I believe, 23 brown red mastery, somewhere around there. And you are going to want to put through your masteries into those two main colors, just due to how amazingly good this weapon is. You'll probably end up having this around level 80 to 100 or so, depends how leveling goes. But you would definitely have it way before level 100 if you use your masteries correctly. But basically, this weapon is so notorious mainly because of its armor tear, which allows you to completely deplete a enemy's armor to 0. One of the other reasons why armor is the last stat you get, as it's the most useless stat out of the 4. And ends up doing a small amount of damage, but the most noteworthy thing is that it converts all the armor you destroy into attack, so it upscales very well into harder content. Let's say something has 50 armor, you just gain 50 attack. Let's say it has 200 armor, you just gain 200 attack. So even if your attack value is something like 10, you can potentially gain a lot of damage out of this, and it scales throughout the entire game regardless of what kind of content you're doing. So really good against content that is much harder to do, as if you just simply use Titan, gain a bunch of barrier off of its trait that ends up giving you a barrier every single time you take a brown, you're pretty much going to be safe from damage for the most part, while simultaneously being able to kill whatever you're facing with some skulls. So it's going to be really strong. The rest of this team you might not necessarily have. However, all this is ultra rare below, which are really low rarity stuff. But you might be missing one of these things. You can try substituting it out. But the main three I have here are Cockatrice, Apothecary, and Dragonian Monk. Cockatrice is very noteworthy in early game. It's a rare that can be accumulated from gold keys and glory keys. It has a lot of disables on it, and it is notorious for being used in early to mid game and pretty much throughout the entire game, just as a really cheap, consistent disable option. It entangles an enemy, which reduces their attack to 0 for the duration of the entangle, and it ends up draining their mana, so whatever their mana is at will go all the way to 0, assuming they do not have immune. It also ends up creating its own color, which is very rare for a troop to have. Not only that, but it can actually create a pretty consistent amount of its own color. If you're draining something that has 12 mana, you'll be able to get 9 browns. And even if you're barely draining any mana at all, you're by default going to get at least 6 brown. And not only does it use that color, but of course you can synergize that into troops that also use that color in order to feed them additional mana. Other than that, we have Apothecary here. Apothecary is one of the best cleanses in the game. Not only does it cleanse all allies for 10 mana, but it only, not only does it cleanse all allies, but it does it for only 10 mana, which is one of the cheapest options in the game for doing so, not only in its rarity sake, but also just as far as its mana cost is concerned. Not just this, but it has a single convert that can convert any gem other than skulls into brown, and that will allow you to accumulate a lot of brown for your team, get various extra turns, and just be able to keep down any brown team. It's particularly noteworthy as a good majority of the better weapons in the game are brown related. So Apothecary tends to be one of the things that you tend to use a lot, as it just covers so many roles simultaneously. Other than that, Dragonian Monk is a pretty good troop to have just to make sure you never die. It ends up doing a little bit of a weird move in that it destroys an X shape, which will allow you to accumulate a bunch of mana as well as some board control. But the most noteworthy thing about this is it barriers a random ally per yellow destroyed, kind of like Elwyn in that its boost ratio is based on yellow, except this time for every yellow you destroy, it's a barrier onto your team. These will barrier randomly and will re-barrier things that already have barrier. However, if you destroy 4 yellows, this is a guaranteed barrier your entire team. And this is pretty noteworthy as he gains a lot of mana from this ability, has a relatively low mana cost. Once you get it traded, it can even start with a decent amount of mana, and is basically one of the best overall barrier options in the entire game, excluding hero. So really, really good just to have to make sure that you have a way to mitigate higher damage. One nice thing about Barrier is it's really good in early to mid game when fighting harder pieces of content, as it will completely negate out one whole instance of damage. So it doesn't matter if they're hitting you for 10 damage or 200 or 300, it'll still deal 0 if they're only doing 1 instance of damage. So barrier spamming tends to be pretty important when fighting higher leveled content within the game, just to make sure that you have a basis for being able to survive. Anyways, on to the next one. As far as a PvP team that you can kind of run, this team has gone through a lot of alliterations in the past as far as alterations that have made it better. But as far as one of the better ones for super cheap right now, it is Mountain Cursor set as Titan, Rock Spirit, which you might not necessarily have, but basically the whole purpose of this is kind of like Elwyn, except it does it on brown instead of on yellow. It's basically just a slightly weaker version of Elwyn, essentially. Then we have Elwyn, which does it for yellows, and then we have a Merlion. Merlion's mainly relevant in that it has silence on it. Silence is a decent mechanic in that it prevents a troop from being able to accumulate any mana, and if they currently have full mana, it prevents them from casting their ability until the silence has been cleansed. So it's a good way to get rid of really strong abilities on the opposing team that might be of a threat, just to disable them for a short duration of time and kill them out with high amounts of damage prior to them being able to get it off. And this entire team should be pretty easy to obtain. These ultra rares can be obtained in Glory and gem keys. And if you don't have something like this, you can run something more like the previous team that ended up showing using the event troop. As far as Tower of Doom is generally considered end game content, or at minimum mid game content. However, on Nintendo Switch, it will be on Yellow Tower of Doom this week. So I composed a team that is relatively easy to obtain, that could potentially be obtainable within the first week. And as far as the first true troops, can actually be obtained probably within the first day. So this is what I was mentioning earlier, the Shield of Riscea. It's one of the main reasons you're going to want to get it, is to always synergize it with this Ethereal Sentry. It's a really cheap, consistent combo to obtain, since all you really need to do is throw about 40 to 100 Chaos Shards from the Underworld into your Hall of Guardians in order to try to obtain this troop. But basically, the whole purpose of this team is to go cast this Ethereal Sentry, use it onto your hero that is accumulating a bunch of armor, and then for every armor that it has, it will gain 1 attack. So this is kind of like a Mang in a way, except you're doing it based on a armor buff onto yourself based on their attack, which then gives you a bunch of attacks. So it's kind of like Mang, except ever so slightly different. It's just a safer version of it in a way. So that's basically what we're doing with this. Herdmaster, if you happen to have, is basically used to accumulate a bunch of mana. It has the benefit also of something like Apothecary in that it does have a really good cleanse all allies, get rid of any negative stats effects that might be on your team. And other than that, Dragonian Monk I already explained, but he's basically just a barrier spam to make sure that higher level content, which will occur in Tower of Doom, it just basically makes sure that you don't really die to it as quickly. So this is something that you can run for the yellow day. And even just in general, even if you're not running on something that is restricted just to yellow, you will be able to just run with these two into something, into 2 other troops, depending on what you currently have available. And you might be wondering, why is there a brown troop on here if it's supposed to be pure yellow? It's kind of weird, but in things like Tower of Doom, Delves, and a few other pieces of content within the game, even though it tells you like you're restricted to, let's say, yellow or green, blue, or whatever it might tell you, you are allowed to use any colored hero weapon. So this is applicable in every location except for Guild Wars. While you have the choice of doing it in Guild Wars, it does reduce points. But anyways, that's a whole nother topic in itself. But anyways, yes, you are allowed to actually use any colored hero weapon. So we are allowed to use the really strong brown hero weapons, regardless of what the color restriction is for any given game mode. So do be mindful of that. Other than that, one other team to really show is Key Team. One of the best teams currently in the game as far as overall farming is something like Cedric, Egg Thief, Skeleton Key, and Leprechaun. Unfortunately, Cedric Sparkle Sack is a relatively hard troop to obtain, as it is only obtained in Vault Keys at a slightly low rate, so you might not be able to get a Cedric to put in first slot. However, there is an alternative to it. As I mentioned, Apothecary, really good troop, a lot of brown, has great cleanse. You can put that into first slot. It also gains the benefit of having a 25% gold instead of Cedric's 100%. The reason why this is relevant is due to Skeleton Key. This you end up obtaining from the Thief class from Zejin, as I mentioned earlier, and this will be able to do a decent amount of damage to your enemies based on gold. This is particularly useful in early game, as gold is a static thing that can never really be obtained, or cannot really be obtained at a higher rate when you get into it later in the game. It always has a static amount. It always starts at 100 and can only get higher based on the percents that your troops tend to have. So with this team, you'd be able to have either 100 or 125, depending on if your apothecary is traded or not. And even just with 100, you could potentially get 50 additional damage onto Skeleton Key. And obviously, being able to do 100 additional damage in early game is excessively high. So really great weapon to have, gains extra turn whenever you end up getting a kill with it. Egg Thief also boosts based on gold and will be used to accumulate a lot of mana. Also summons a meat shield of dragon eggs into your first slot once your apothecary dies. And other than that, we have Leprechaun here. Normally, Greed would be used here. However, in early game, Leprechaun has much better value. Not only does he do a bunch of explosions, but he also has a static 20 gold gain, which might actually be higher than Greed, at least from an early game perspective. Other than that, you do want to make sure you try getting it fully traded eventually, which will end up giving it extra green mana, as well as Empowered, which allows it to accumulate mana from the very first turn. Aside from Mountain Crusher, is basically one of the best mana accumulating methods within the entire game. So highly advise getting this thing upgraded and using it quite a bit. And those are basically the main rundown on teams of various stuff. So before I get into resource usage, I do want to go over how to use money if you are going to be spending money. The main thing to really note that's noteworthy here is basically one purchase within the game, and that is armors. There's a specific pack, the Death Knight Armor Pack, that costs $50. This is basically what I would consider the best value purchase in the game, as well as the essentially buy the game option. Most games in free-to-play games, they have some kind of pack where it's essentially like buying the game, even if it's not necessarily, straight up buying the game. And Gems of War has that too. That is essentially the Death Knight armor. Not only does it give you 100% bonus onto everything, which will help, of course, reduce down the grind, it will end up making it so you don't need to buy Dragon Armor or Celestial Armor, both of which cost 500 gems, which in total will save you, just in getting Death Knight Armor, 1,000 gems of savings. Not only that, but it comes with a bunch of various keys that will be able to start you off just to kind of get things rolling, and is not obtainable by any other means. Not just this, but spending $30 on the game, which would happen if you spend $50 on Death Knight, or however much it is in your localization, will end up unlocking VIP 3. And VIP 3 is pretty noteworthy, mainly because it gives automatic scouting, probably the most important thing that actually is obtained from VIP. For the most part, the VIP system is pretty pointless, and not really something you should be worrying about. And you can go completely free to play and not worry about any of this at all. However, this is probably the only noteworthy thing from spending money that really comes into the game, just so they basically didn't want to put anything too overpowered here. But automatic free scouting is pretty decent, as it can save you about 1 second or 2 seconds every single time, simply by having the troop automatically scouting, instead of having to spend 50 gold and then waiting a second to see it. And it basically just makes the whole entire game more convenient, since you'll always be able to see the opposing team regardless of the game mode that you're playing. So it is generally advised to have this, not required, but if you're planning on playing for hundreds of hours, it will definitely save you a lot of frustration throughout the foreseeable future. But yes, it's mainly that purchase. There are a few others that could potentially be considered worth your while. One is they sometimes run like $5 daily deals or weekly deals or some kind of deals for occasionally. Those flash offers are normally worth it. All of these starter packs that you'll end up seeing that say like, hey, these are starter packs, don't go for them. They are not worth it. Generally, buying legends are also not worth it unless it's an insanely good legend, but for the most part, not really worth it for how much they cost. The only ones that are really worth it from this particular page right here that will ever appear here is the $50 one of the Growth Pack 2, as well as the monthly deal where you spend $20 to get a bunch of bonuses, as well as several other resources. This is particularly noteworthy when you're first starting out on the game, if you feel like you're going to be grinding a lot, or after a few weeks once you kind of got a footing and you know you're going to be playing a lot, simply because it will end up accumulating the amount of resources that you end up increasing the amount of resources that you end up accumulating per hour. Other than that, and the daily gems underneath the shop, most of the other things you should be ignoring. All these gems right here, for the most part, you should be ignoring. They normally go on sales, and even during sales, they might not necessarily be worth it. You should never spend your gems on gold or souls. They are 100% pointless. Never, ever, ever do that. Every single thing here, other than daily gems, is pretty much pointless. All of these right here, as I mentioned, are pretty much pointless, but the only exception sometimes being the $5 weapon. And that's basically it. And other than that, these glory rewards are basically free. And everything here you can pretty much ignore too. Typhoon of Keys isn't really worth it. Most of those keys are not really worth it for that value. These epic ingots you don't really need for anything. Most epic weapons are useless. And these keys are basically not really useful either, the VIP keys. So you can pretty much just ignore a good majority of stuff that are available for cash. Not saying that you should never ever go for them, but generally if you want to save money, the only things you should really worry about is essentially just Death Knight. Is one of the only real main things you need. and kind of just go from there. If you feel like something's worth it, of course you can go for it. But those are basically Death Knight and those other few I mentioned are the only few you really want to focus on if you are going to bother spending money. Anyways, as far as resource usage, there are many resources within this game, and I just want to go over how to use some of them. I've kind of already explained a few, but let's just go and break down many of the other ones. So, let's start with some of the more basic ones. Gold. Gold is the most common resource that you're ever going to accumulate. You accumulate a good majority of this, as I mentioned, from playing PvP. You are going to want to accumulate a lot of gold. The main thing that you use gold for when you're first starting out in the game is to get every single kingdom to level 3 or to level 4. And then once you've gotten that done and obtained every single kingdom, for the banner, you're going to want to get them to level 10, starting with magic, then attack, then HP, then armor, as I already mentioned. That's the main purpose you have for your gold. You could also use it to try to go to the underworld and grab some higher upgrades onto some hordes. This is what you would most likely want to put on Warrens first, as it's the best faction to specifically camp when first starting out and keeping at level 20. And you can basically just put this up. You end up getting higher quality. Getting higher quality on this thing ends up giving you better resources. It starts off all the way at 1 times, where it just gives 1 times multiplier to everything, but then gives quite a bit higher multiplier, as well as 3 free delve upgrade chests at the end. This is relatively easy to obtain and helps in accumulating resources. You always want to make sure as you're going through delves in the underworld to focus 1 at a time. So start off with like camping level 20 on Warrens, and then go and get it to level 10, and then get a whole nother faction to level 10 before ever bothering to leave Warren. So do make sure to get this up, as it is pretty important in order to accumulate a bunch of better loot from whatever delves you end up focusing on. Other than that, that's pretty much most of the main purposes for gold, other than, of course, putting it into your guild. Guild tasks are going to give you a lot of resources. Whenever a guild task is completed in the guild, it gives it to absolutely every member of your guild. So it is good to coordinate with 29 other peoples into a guild of 30 and try to at least set up some kind of minimum per week. Even if it's only something like 50,000 or 100,000, you do generally want to try being in a guild that has some kind of okay minimum that's easy for you to do, while still giving your entire guild, as well as yourself, a bunch of resources. Next up is Glory. Glory, for the most part, you're going to be wanting to throw onto Glory keys when starting out in the game. However, there are 2 other things that could be considered worth it when you're first starting out, or technically 3, depending on your playstyle. One is, of course, the event troop. This tends to be one of the best value that you can get, mainly because there's a bonus resource that you can end up getting, in this case gold, every single week. It also gives trade stones, also gives you a few other keys, but getting one of these is generally always advised every single week. Other than that, Spoils of War, while this will be limited to 10 purchases in the future as far as how many you can get per week, this is somewhat decent if the event key drop table is good at any given time. This current week, the event key drop table is not good, so you shouldn't really be spending any event keys. However, there are weeks where the event table is insanely good, like let's say if it's like a Dragon's Claw event with Dragon Soul and stuff like that. And in cases like those, you're probably going to want to accumulate slightly more in order to be able to obtain those troops. This first week, at least on Nintendo Switch, that would not be applicable. And the only other thing that's really noteworthy here, never do it on Souls, but treasure maps. Treasure maps, while they are a little bit expensive at 30 glory each for these things, if you want to infinitely do treasure maps and you don't have like a Tyree or anything yet to farm off some maps, or Skeleton Key to farm maps, you're going to want to mainly just buy them for 30 glory each. It's a pretty fun game mode when first starting out and does give decent payout, particularly if you don't have any of the armors yet that are really good, like Death Knight or Dragon Armor Celestial. But it's basically just a fun little game mode to gain some resources. In early game, it's pretty decent to do. However, as you start progressing through the game, it will become less and less applicable. Other than that, souls. Souls, you're pretty much just going to want to be putting into troops. There's really no other purpose for them other than that. Just level up whatever troops you feel like you're going to be using to their max level that they can currently get to, and just be allocating towards that. There's some stuff in Soulforge and stuff too, but for the most part, you should only be using these initially to level up various teams and to try out teams. One thing to note about leveling things up initially is make sure to level things to about level 5 or 10 or so before you ever bother committing them to their max level, or however far you can currently level them. The main reason for this is the further you level them, the more souls each level is going to be required. So you do want to make sure you don't overspend your souls and level up something that turns out to just be useless. So you don't normally just want to go to level 5 or 10, test to see if it's actually viable, then go from there. One other pretty noteworthy thing for souls when first starting out, and probably actually the very first thing you should actually do with it before anything else, is hero levels. Even before you go and upgrade troops, you do want to try getting a hero up to level 20. Hero gains a lot of benefits from being leveled, and oddly enough is even cheaper than a common to fully max out on level. So really noteworthy to actually get these things up. The main ones you'd want to go for are things like Titan, Thief, maybe Sentinel, for the time that you're trying to get 250 wins on it and stuff like that. But mainly Titan and Thief are the two bigger ones that you'd probably want to focus down with your souls when first starting out. Other than that, the gems. Gems are the premium currency within this game, and there are 1.5 billion things to spend them on. It might almost just be easier to say what not to spend them on, but when you're first starting out, the main things that you should really be spending it on is if you are not buying the $50 Death Knight pack and you're playing the game free to play, the very first thing you want to get if you're not getting Death Knight is get Dragon Armor. This does cost 500 gems, which is really pricey. However, it is 100% gold gain and 50% souls and EXP. This is noteworthy as you need gold a lot more than you need souls when you're first starting out in the game for kingdom upgrades, as well as to be able to help your guild out to get started and get rolling. So it is highly advised if you're playing free to play and not getting Death Knight to go for Dragon Armor as basically your first gem purchase that you ever do, and use those 500 gems for that you can accumulate through various stuff. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to do with your gems. Basically everything beyond that with your gems, you're either going to want to throw on various guild related events if you want to try getting your guild onto leaderboard for various events when first starting out, or you're going to want to go and put it into 50 bulks of gem keys. Gem keys cost 10 gems each. However, when you buy them in bulks of 10 or 50, they are slightly cheaper, and when buying them at 50, they only cost 9 gems each, so 450 gems for 50. These are how you're going to accumulate a good majority of troops within the game. And obviously, when you're first starting out, you have basically 0 troops, so you're going to want to do this, as you can gain a lot of really high rarity stuff. It drops ultra rares and higher, and has a good chance of getting legends and mythics off of it, which are the highest level rarity stuff within the game. And these are generally the main thing that you'll be sinking your gems into the foreseeable future, as when you're first starting out, it is really important to try to accumulate as many troops as you can. And the nice thing about this is, unlike later in the game, in mid-game and late game and stuff, we're getting a lot of repeats from these keys. When you're first starting out, almost every single drop you're getting from these keys are going to be brand new drops that you currently don't have. So definitely good to focus on gem keys for the most part with your gem spending. So basically, get armors first, then go and spend them into gem keys. And for the most part, those are the only two things you really need to worry about. You might see billions of other things to spend gems on, but those are your two biggest focuses. That and helping your guild occasionally with events. But the two biggest focuses are always going to be on that initial armor, if you're not getting Death Knight, or on 50 bulks of gem keys. And you do want to wait for 50 bulks and be patient, just because it overall will save you gems in the long run. Other than that, there are some other various resources that aren't just these core 4. Some of these can be found underneath your page over here, underneath your inventory. The first main one I want to go over are orbs. So, orbs of growth and major orbs of growth. When in early game, you can pretty much throw this into whatever you feel like you want to use at a given time. These you can't really mess up too badly, so not need to worry about them too much as far as what you spend them on. If you feel like using these to get something up leveled quickly, it's probably okay to use it. As far as orbs of ascension, these you want to be very, very, very careful with using, as these are the most valuable orbs and you do not want to waste them. In the long term, the best way to use both of these is major orbs of ascensions. You should save for Zugoth. That might seem a little bit pointless at first, but if you're going for 100% completion in Gems of War, it does take about a little over a year to end up accumulating a Zugoth in the current state of the game. So yes, it does take quite a while to accumulate him, and if you spend major blue orbs, you're going to be further away from obtaining him. So you do want to save your major blues for that. As far as your smaller blue orbs, these you mainly want to use on anything that you've ascended up to legendary that you then want to get to mythic. So underneath troop pages, you can use the extra spare copies of troops to get them ascended. You're always going to want to do this. And when something has currently gotten up to legendary, either because it's base legendary or because if you ascended it to that point, you might want to consider using a blue orb to get it to mythic. The main ones that you would want to use this on are legendaries that you have that you feel like you're going to be using into the future. This can be based on your own preference, based on kingdom upgrades, or based on what you currently have. As far as specifically what you do them on, it is really depend on what you want to do, but you only ever want to do this on legendaries. It doesn't matter if they're base legendary or ascended to legendary, but you never want to use it on anything that's below that rarity, otherwise you're wasting a lot of its value. Orange orbs, you're mainly going to want to throw on legends and mythics, particularly their second and third trait, as far as the smaller one, and mainly on mythics for the bigger one. This is mainly because the second and third traits on legends and mythics are the most expensive. Obviously, mythics being slightly more expensive, however, doing it on either or are still going to be fine. If you have a really good legend that you know is seems like it has a pretty decent final ability and you know you're going to want to use it, it's perfectly fine to go use 1 or 2 on those final 2 traits, as it will save you a lot of times of having to accumulate trait stones. Orbs of Clans are basically just a way to gain seals, which are basically just keys for your guild. These you could pretty much just use immediately or save them to try to get to 20,000 or 40,000 total in your week, as having 20,000 or 40,000 total seals on a given week will increase the drop table of skilled keys by a little bit. And Orbs of Powers are basically not obtained by any means other than leaderboards and are generally pretty hard to obtain in general. You can craft them to eventually get Zugoff, but other than using them for Zugoff, there's essentially no purpose for them. So as far as some of the other resources, let's go over, for the most part, the only one that we really need to go over here are keys. Let me go over to the key menu here. So, keys. There are various keys in the game. The biggest thing to really mention with all of these is use all of them immediately when you're first starting out in the game, except for 2. Event keys and guild keys. These 2 keys you should never, ever, ever, ever use immediately. Gold keys you can, glory keys you can, gem keys you can, VIP keys if you buy them or anything you can. However, guild keys and event keys do not spend immediately. These both have a slightly different way that they do their drop table, of which I've kind of already slightly explained, but let me go in a little bit more in depth. So, guild chests. Guild chests are based on how many seals your guild currently has at a given time. These you generally throw down on Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays, as your guild would have had plenty of time to accumulate seals. But basically, as you can see here, there's a total amount of seals that you've accumulated from your guild, and you can accumulate 1,500 per week from doing various stuff. You can go even higher once you orbs if you want to use orbs on it. One thing to noteworthy real quick on orbs, do make sure you have 1,500 before you use orbs, otherwise the whole value of the orb will be wasted. But you can get 1,500 per week, and then once you have 1,500, you can use orbs to get a little bit more if you want. But basically, this total keeps going up based on how much seals your guild has accumulated, and it determines kind of what drops you end up getting. Once you get it to 20,000, it's very similar to that of a glory key. And once you get it to 40,000, it's very similar to that of a gem key. But you normally want to wait, because even how far this guild has progressed, you can see it's only Tuesday and we haven't really gotten that far. These keys are almost always something that you throw during the weekends, particularly when new mythics come out and stuff. However, you can throw it on any weekend where your guild happens to be at 20,000 or 40,000. But I highly advise never, ever, ever opening guild keys prior to your guild at any given moment being at 20,000. Anything prior to that is greatly reducing its resources, and even using at 20,000 compared to 40,000 is slightly wasting your resources. However, when first starting out, your guild is most likely only going to be able to reach 20,000, if even that. So you want to be aiming for only whenever it's at 20,000 to use them. But anyways, that's what you would mainly use with that. And as far as event keys are a little bit weird. They are going to be changed in the future. Currently, how they work right now is they drop you ultra rares and up from a given kingdom, but starting next patch, they're going to drop every single rarity from a specific kingdom and might have a slightly higher legend and mythic drop rate. But basically, they cost 15 gems each. They're normally not worth spending gems on. However, if you end up accumulating any, you want to save them, and save them for whenever it's a good guild event. This current event is Glacial Peaks, as you can see right over there, and it will basically drop all of the Ultra Rare Plus currently of Glacial Peaks, or into the future, all of the troops of that given kingdom. And basically, it shifts from week to week on Monday, reset day, to what drop table will end up having. So this particular week, it just will drop most of these troops, the most noteworthy ones being like Queen Map or Skady, but however, these things are not really worth going out of your way for. So on this given week, it's not really worth using event keys, but it tends to shift from week to week. So for example, let's just say, let's just pick one out that's somewhat decent. Actually, I'll use the example from earlier. Let's just say it was something like Dragon's Claw. Something like a Dragon's Claw event, you are going to want to go and throw event keys down. There's a lot of insanely good troops from the kingdom. It's a little bit hard to really determine on a given week if it is or isn't as a newer player. I do go over it on every Monday video that I end up doing. However, you can go through the page if you want to know for yourself by clicking Show All or simply Show Unowned to see what kind of drop table it has for any given kingdom on a given week. But let's just say, like, for example, this was an event week. You would definitely want to throw your event keys down because there's really good things like Divinia that has a lot of cleanse, mana accumulation, and HP gain. Has Dragonian Monk, which has one of the best barrier options in the game. Has Egg Thief, which is really good for mana accumulation, particularly gold keys. Has Dragon Soul, which is one of the best soul gaining troops in the entire game. And has a mythic. Not the greatest of mythics, but does have the chance of dropping a mythic as well. Kingdoms that don't have a mythic don't have any chance, but if they have a mythic, well, you have the chance of getting that one. But yeah, it tends to vary heavily from week to week as far as how valuable it is. However, this first week of the Nintendo Switch launch is definitely not worth it to use event keys. But anyways, guys, before this video goes on too much longer, that is pretty much everything I wanted to mention. If you still have any other questions, again, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. We will be able to answer absolutely any concerns that you may have. And if you have any, if you want me to go over any specific early game videos as well, feel free to leave those below. If you want me to comprehensively go over anything, I will be streaming the Nintendo Switch version a lot the upcoming week, as well as probably the first month, but particularly these first several days and week of the launch of Nintendo Switch version. We will be playing it heavily in order to try to start up a brand new account and have a lot of fun with it. So I hope you all have the best of luck in Gems of War, and I will catch you all later. Goodbye, everyone!